Communion in the earliest church began around the tables of homes like yours and mine. I know we're used to seeing communion in spaces like this, with tables dressed like this, but this isn't how this communion table began. It began in the guest room of a friend's home, where Jesus shared a last meal with his disciples. It began at the table of a disciple named Cleopas and his wife, and whereas they broke bread with the resurrected Jesus, they saw and recognized him. It began at a table that was an early morning breakfast fire built by Jesus to feed his disciples. Later in the early church, we hear that they worshiped together at the temple each day, met in homes for the Lord's Supper, and shared their meals with great joy and generosity. The table is how the church has always seen Jesus. As one theologian put it, the people of Messiah are defined by the table of Messiah. So as we gather at all of our tables, we're invited to remember that wherever God has been saving God's people, there has been a table and food in which we've seen God's promise and God's salvation at work and experienced God's tangible presence. We remember the three messengers of the Lord who brought the hope and promises of God to Abraham. We remember the meal of Passover, a meal of salvation that the Hebrews ate before their exodus from Egypt. We remember the manna that fell from heaven in the wilderness to feed God's people as they journeyed to the promised land. We remember Jesus eating at tables with tax collectors and Pharisees, with zealots and prostitutes, with friends and the broken. We remember Jesus, 7 loaves and several fish, and the feeding of the 4,000. We remember Jesus and 5 loaves and 2 fish, and the feeding of the 5,000. And we see, ultimately, into the future, the vision of the prophets, of Isaiah and others, the vision that they have given us, that on this mountain, the Lord of hosts will make a feast for all people. We remember all of these stories of food and tables, and God's salvation, and we see Jesus in them, as we see Jesus at our own tables and at this table. And we know his promise is true. Wherever we are gathered together, however we are gathered together, Jesus is there. And wherever there is Jesus, there is salvation. So as you lift up whatever you have for his body, we see together that it is Jesus' body, and we remember his words, "Take and eat. This is my body given for you. Do this for the remembrance of me." And as we lift up our cups, filled with whatever they are filled with, we remember Jesus' words. "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, shed for you and for all people for the forgiveness of sin. Do this for the remembrance of me."